I went into Pokemon Legends ZA with a single notion at the forefront of my mind. I thought to myself as I hit purchase on the Nintendo eShop, this is their last chance. I used to love Pokemon. It was one of my biggest fixations as a kid. When factoring in nostalgia, Pokemon Black and White probably still fall into my top 10 favorite games of all time, or at the very least top 20. But as I grew older, especially over the past few years, I found myself questioning whether these games are really all that great. Sword and Shield were probably my least favorite generation of Pokemon that I'd played, and Scarlet and Violet weren't much of a step up. These games were ugly, horribly unoptimized, and hardly felt like the next great step forward for the franchise in a gameplay sense. However, Pokemon Legends Arceus, on the other hand, was a breath of fresh air that fundamentally changed how you approach interacting with Pokemon in their environment, despite still being kinda ugly. But a lot of those great ideas were later set aside in Scarlet and Violet to maintain some sort of main series status quo. If we are to assume that this Legends subseries is where Game Freak should be at their most innovative, then Legends ZA, for me personally, has a lot riding on it when considering my future with this franchise. Character creation is pretty rudimentary, although I do appreciate being able to give myself bags under my eyes. They still stick you with the default haircut to start though, which I think is a little silly. The first thing that really stood out to me was the stiffness and lifelessness of the character animations. The human characters just move and emote like robots. This, in combination with a lack of voice acting, makes everyone feel rather hollow. And look, I'm not one of the people demanding full voice acting for every single character, but in these animated cutscenes where intense stuff is supposed to be happening, it's just jarring to hear nothing at all. Your trainer even grunts when they roll, so I'm not too convinced that everyone in this world is just mute. The first several hours of this game are honestly a slog to get through. You are assaulted with dialogue box after dialogue box, which would be fine if the characters had anything meaningful to say, but in my opinion, they just don't. Character interactions primarily boil down to three things: tutorial info, instructions for your next task, and telling you how special of a trainer you are. The people in this game don't talk like people, they talk like signboards. Once the game finally cuts you loose though, I started enjoying myself a lot more. I was able to actually explore, collect stuff, and work on setting up my team for success, which are the things I generally enjoy doing the most in these games. You're given a lot of little incentives and checklists of things to do, but it all comes back to catching and battling Pokemon. And thankfully, those two actions are as seamless as they've ever been in Legends ZA. Throwing Pokeballs, summoning your Pokemon to fight. When you're actually playing the game, there's very little downtime, which I appreciate. Menus are simple and snappy. The big selling point that Legends ZA touted before launch was this real-time battle system. You no longer take turns. Moves are instead on various cooldown timers, so you do need to be actively involved when it comes to punching in attack commands. Pokemon don't stand still when they're fighting either. Moves have certain ranges and areas of effect. It makes battles feel much more dynamic. You can actively move around the battlefield and your Pokemon will follow you, so there is an element of being able to avoid certain attacks, but it's a bit janky since you're controlling your trainer and not the Pokemon itself. Is this the next big step forward for strategic Pokemon battling? Maybe not, but it's definitely a fun change of pace. Let's talk about exploration. I was very skeptical about the whole city setting going into this game. I was worried that it would make things feel too contained, too controlled for a game about powerful monsters fighting. Lumio City in general is pretty homogeneous. The different districts are composed mostly of the same few building textures, so it's hard to know where you are without the map. There's scaffolding set up in various places to let you do some janky platforming though, and being able to get up onto the rooftops and see the city from a new perspective, that's fun. The wild areas are where you'll be engaging with wild Pokemon the most, and there's some visual differences between each area, whether it's the way the area is divided up or the general biome, like grassy or snowy. The wild areas are where the game is at its most dynamic. Different Pokemon species have different behaviors when they spot you. Some run away, some immediately attack you, and then there are the alpha Pokemon, which are these massive, over-leveled monsters with glowing red eyes that will wipe out your whole team if you're unprepared. You can get caught up fighting like 5 Pokemon at once if you're not careful, but there's never a true sense of danger because the moment you leave the wild area, you're completely safe. I find myself thinking back to Legends Arceus, where the whole game was just a big wild area, and those Pokemon would chase you to the ends of the earth if you pissed them off. There's also no real penalty for getting knocked out or having your team KO'd either. You just warp back to a Pokemon Center. You don't even lose money like you used to. The game is incredibly forgiving and hands out experience points Well, like candy. You get experience candies just from running around the city, which is nice because it means even just casually exploring Lumios results in your team getting stronger, but it's also very easy to become overleveled and demolish everything save for alpha Pokemon. I gave my Ariados a few stat boosters, and then every battle just became Swords Dance and X Scissor, and I win, regardless of any type advantages. The lack of difficulty is only a minor complaint. I was never under any assumption that the game would be difficult. If you want a major complaint, though, let's talk about the story, because oh my god. Listen, I don't usually get like this, but I have to speak my truth on this one. I have zero emotional investment in this game's story. It is trite, it is boring, it is at points annoying. Characters range from inoffensive at best to outright obnoxious at worst. Like I said before, most of them exist purely to push the player in the right direction to progress the game. The characters that are the most fun to interact with are legitimately the bit characters that exist for individual side quests. The whole arc with the streamer girl was the point where I realized that this game's story wasn't just underwhelming, it was directly detracting from my enjoyment of the game. In order to reach the next rank in the ZA Royale, you have to beat Canary, who is this big gaming streamer, but she and her audience are just so obnoxious. One of your friends, Naveen, is like her biggest fan, and it's this really weird and kind of gross parasocial relationship where he legitimately gets mad and mouths off at his friends if they don't show her what he believes is the proper respect. Canary herself ends up being quite the annoying person too, and for a second I was like, oh, maybe the writers are going to make some sort of commentary on parasocial relationships and the true nature of influencers, but for Naveen there is no aha moment. In fact, the arc ends with those feelings being reinforced rather than deconstructed. You have to jump through all these hoops just to get a promotion match with Canary, and it all just feels like such a huge waste of time. We don't even need to talk about her grandfather making hologram deepfakes of her. Let's just move on. Believe me when I say this, because this is important. I do literally everything else available to me before I engage with this game's story. I will do every side quest, I will clear out every wild area, I will even grind levels before resigning myself to doing the main quest. But you have to engage with the story in order to open up new wild areas and enable new side quests. And it's gotten to the point where I'm legitimately putting off playing the game anymore now that I've hit that roadblock. The only saving grace for the main quest is the boss battles against the rogue Mega Evolved Pokemon, and those are legitimately fun and frantic, but you have to trudge through so much text that ultimately ends up saying nothing. And unlike another game with a subpar story but great gameplay, like, say, Fire Emblem Engage, there is no skip option for these drawn-out dialogue sequences. Pokémon Legends ZA combines Pokémon gameplay at its most dynamic and visceral, with a story that I feel actively makes the game less fun to play. As a creature capturing and battling game, it's a lot of fun. As an RPG, it makes me question what I enjoyed about this franchise in the first place. At the end of all this, I'm left with more questions than answers. Is Pokémon a franchise that I still want to support? Would I have had these same complaints as a kid, or have I just grown to a point where my tastes have changed and I'm more cynical? I still had fun, but I was also frustrated and disappointed. Pokémon is the highest grossing media franchise on the planet, worth over $100 billion. So shouldn't we expect better? I mean, I think so. Ultimately, we as gamers have more choice now than we've ever had before. So many amazing games are at our fingertips, it can be hard to decide what to spend our precious gaming hours and money on. When looking at things from that perspective, I think I'm finally ready to let go and leave Pokemon in the past. Maybe I'll boot up Emerald or Platinum for a Nuzlocke every few years for nostalgia's sake, but as far as the new mainline games go, I think this is my stop.